Hello and welcome to this video on A Sociology. What is functionalism? So the purpose of this video is so that you can have AO1, be able to describe what functionalism is. You'll be able to use AO2, which is applying functionalism to real world examples, and AO3, which is analysing and evaluating what's the strengths, what's the weaknesses, and how does it shape up in comparison to the other theories. So let's jump into it. What type of perspective is it? When we're studying society, we can use different lenses in order to look at society. So we may look at one problem, for example, crime and deviance, and if you apply different theories, you can come up with different conclusions about what the causes are, why people do things, and the consequences for us. And more importantly, what we can do about it, unless you're a postmodernist, in which case you can't do anything. Why bother? So we branch into two theories. We've got structural theories and we've got action theories. Now, functionalism is a structural theory, but it also believes that society is in consensus. It means society is trying to work in balance with each other rather than society working in conflict, which is the opposite theory proposed by, say, Marxism or feminism. So, it is a structural consensus theory. Functionalism is a theory that emphasizes the power of society over the individual. Thus, we can describe it as a top-down theory. It says by studying society, we can draw conclusions about the individual rather than social action, which looks at the individual and draws conclusions about society. Society has a huge influence over individual behavior. It directly shapes what we do. Consequently, it argues that consensus, working together, is the basis of society. Without this, it would break down into what we can call anarchy. Society is a social system based on value consensus, one of the key words. Individuals, you and I, are socialized into cultures, which is a group that has shared identity based around history, language, etc. And each culture has unique norms and values. So an example might be the value of love in our society today. I've chosen quite a nice example here. And in terms of values, that presents itself in behaviours such as marriage, monogamy, and we highlight behaviours that break it, such as cheating, and we see it spread across the newspapers, etc. When all of these values and norms are shared, it creates a value consensus and it leads to social solidarity. It starts being developed by the sociologist Emil Durkheim in the late 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. So you've got to imagine this is a period of rapid change in France, and he's concerned that society is rapidly changing and we need to understand it. He observed that society is shaped by social facts such as norms and values that are passed on and shared. We can study these social facts and we can draw conclusions, and more importantly, we can understand what we need to do to change things. Durkheim is very aware that too much freedom could result in anarchy, which is this breakdown of a value consensus. Durkheim argues that societies need social solidarity. Individuals need to feel part of something. So if you use this in an example, us as individuals, we need to feel part of society. Our society says that monogamy and marriage are values that we need to achieve. So when we get married, we are contributing towards that social solidarity. Thus, we feel happy. When we have too much freedom and there isn't the societal pressure to get married, or where we have polygamy or where we have cheating, society will highlight this as something that's not done. If too much of this happens, then it will lead to a breakdown of society, what we may see as anarchy. It's developed in the 1960s by Parsons in the United States, and he really does develop this theory to become more of like an organic structure. He argues that society works in a very similar way to the human body. There are institutions in the same way that the body has organs. These organs and these institutions are interdependent. They can work on their own, but they must work together in order to function to the fullest. And we see this in the same with society. Whereas the human body might have the circulatory system, the spinal system, the central nervous system, the kidneys, the hearts, etc. They can work independently, but they need to work together. Problems in one area of society, such as crime, can be a symptom of dysfunction elsewhere. Just like if you have a headache, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is your brain that is the problem. It could be caused by a high fever, or it could be caused by an infection or bacteria or something else. In the same way that if our society has high rates of crime, it could be that there's inadequate socialization, or it could be that there's far too much social stratification. For society to achieve social solidarity, there needs to be a real balance of social cohesion and forces of social control. This is achieved through the socialization process. It comes in two forms. Parsons says that our society have functional prerequisites. These are requirements that must be met in order to survive. He comes up with the agile scheme: adaptation, goal attainment, integration, and latency. Adaptation is the need to adapt to the environment, and this is often filled by institutions such as businesses. It's very much about the economic structures of society. Societies, in order to survive, must decide the goals, and this is often done by government institutions. Society must reinforce these goals and these shared values to achieve cohesion, and this is done through agencies of control, and it must last. It must be passed on to the younger generations, and this is often done through education and religion, etc. Now, this is built on by sociologists such as Murdoch and Davis and Moore. Murdoch argues that the family exists anthropologically in all societies. Davis and Moore argues that we see stratification, that's hierarchy, in every society. They therefore argue that they need these things in order to survive, and this is used by developmental functionalists to argue that stratification is a core concept of our society, that we must have people at the top and we must have people at the bottom, and it can kind of be used as AO3 against some of the criticisms that Marxists and feminists use. From this, we have the socialization process. So we need to achieve value consensus and social solidarity. That is achieved through passing on values and norms to the next generation. The family is responsible for primary socialization. Education is responsible for secondary socialization. These integrate individuals into society. Down at the bottom, you can see that you and I, as a young child, we're socialized by our family, we're socialized through education. It teaches us the value of meritocracy. Meritocracy is working hard and you're being rewarded for that. That, when everybody follows this principle, creates harmony or value consensus that leads to social solidarity. However, if those things weren't there and you were just allowed your individual freedoms, there was no education to put pressure on you to learn to be meritocratic, then you'd be lazy. And that would, of course, cause the world to implode. How do we apply this to the rest of the topics? Now, if you're using this as revision, then you should have covered these already. If you're using this as one of the starter lessons, then we're going to cover this over the next 2 years. It crops up in education. Schools are obviously there as secondary socialization to create social solidarity. And it really is responsible for creating us, giving us roles. Often those are ascribed roles rather than, earned roles rather than ascribed roles. Families, it crops up, primary socialization. Functionalists, just like the New Right, argue that nuclear families is absolutely essential. Any deviation from that causes an inadequate socialization and causes anomie down the line. It teaches traditional gender roles, that men and women have specific, separate, gendered roles to follow. It crops up in religion as secondary socialization. You've got Durkheim's theory of totemism. Religion also provides psychological functions. Malinowski argues this. It crops up in crime. It says that there's a real positive need for crime. It helps reinforce what values are core to our society, and it seeks to highlight when norms are broken. A model world example might be the Harvey Weinstein case. We've seen a massive rapid social change over the last 50 years. Seen huge amounts of progress towards equality with women. Harvey Weinstein goes against this. It crops up in our media, it crops up in our crime system that he's had a harsh punishment in order to stop other people following suit. So it seeks to correct when anomie is occurring. It says that crime is inevitable in society. Now, it's not without fault. It's internally criticised by Robert Merton, who argues that Durkheim and subsequent sociologists do not go far enough. Merton argues that not everything is necessary, not all institutions are interconnected, and not all institutions are working as they should be. Merton argues that functions that Parsons define is too narrow. He gives a much broader definition of latent and manifest functions, which are we can go in at a later stage. In terms of positivity, governments do view society as a system. We do study society from the top down, and seek to make changes that bring about it. It allows us to study society scientifically by measuring these social facts. Durkheim studies, such as a study on suicide, still applicable today. Statistics do reveal interesting correlation. More importantly, it says we can do something about it. If we invest more money in education, we can solve some of the inadequacies of the families. We can solve some of the problems with crime and deviance. It's a model that's followed across the world, and it's why the West invests heavily in third world countries. Now, criticisms, it's often criticised as being teleological. That is, that functionalism explains the existence of institutions by the terms of its effect, but it doesn't look at causes. It's criticised by conflict theories such as Marxism and feminism for ignoring power inequality and exploitation in the world. It's criticised by social action as it's deterministic. It doesn't take an individual approach. And it's criticised by postmodernists as it doesn't apply to the globalised postmodern world that we live in. We do not live in a stable or an orderly system anymore. So put all of those together, we've got very clear AO1 about what is functionalism. We've got AO2, some real-world examples to apply it to, some of the concepts. And now we've got AO3, how do we evaluate it? This means that we could be ready to answer a 20-mark question should it crop up in paper 3. Thank you very much.